A cringe-looking guy in plastic-like armor, a real cyclops, the kind Christopher Nolan would raise for cinema. And of course, epic overflowing from every frame. The Odyssey is one of the most anticipated films of 2026, and what matters most for us, it's also a historical film in its own way. Hey everyone, this is Lord of Leaks. Drop a like and let's get started. First, an ultra-short recap for those who somehow lost access even to libraries. We're roughly in the 10th century BCE. As the trailer carefully hints through rows of graves, these events take place after the Trojan War. It all started when Paris, a Trojan prince, abducted Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, and made a catastrophic mistake. Ancient Greeks loved fighting each other, sure, but when an external enemy appeared, unity kicked in very hard. That's how Agamemnon gathered warriors from countless city-states. And Troy was crushed, captured, emptied, thanks to that legendary maneuver with the horse. But that's not the Odyssey, that's the Iliad, Homer's first epic, focused on war itself. The second poem, the one this film adapts, is about the journal home. That's where Odysseus enters the stage, played by Matt Damon. According to some sources, Odysseus himself came up with the Trojan horse idea, and judging by the fact that the trailer shows scenes from inside the horse, the film seems to agree. The actual story of the Odyssey begins after Troy has already fallen. And here's the twist. The war wasn't just about humans. The gods didn't really care who won. Their goal was to eliminate the age of heroes altogether and usher in an era of ordinary men. The Trojans were wiped out by the Greeks, and according to legend, the survivors fled and eventually founded Rome. But the gods weren't done. The Greek heroes had to be dealt with too. Half the Greek fleet was destroyed almost immediately by Poseidon's storm. Agamemnon was murdered by his wife. Menelaus was blown off course and ended up in Egypt. And Odysseus had it worst of all. For 10 long years, he wandered through monsters and myths, cyclops, sirens, nymphs, cursed transformations, even magical pigs, all in a desperate attempt to get home. And this is where Penelope becomes central. Back in Ithaca, a crowd of suitors besieged Odysseus' wife, terrorizing her and demanding marriage, which would also grant them legal control over Ithaca. After the Trojan War, Ithaca had gained immense prestige, making the throne extremely desirable. That's how Homer structures the epic into two parallel storylines. One follows Odysseus battling fate itself to return home. The other stays in Ithaca, where Penelope and their grown son Telemachus hold a desperate defensive line against increasingly violent suitors. All right, that's the foundation. Now that we've cleared that up, we can finally get more specific. Let's rewind and talk about those infamous plastic-looking armors. The armor is worn by a guy who looks like he was generated by an AI trained on GigaChad Squidward. I'm pretty sure post-production will polish the highlights and textures, and the armor will look better in motion. But if you want a historical take, honestly, don't ask. You don't need to be a historian to see the issue. Just remember what the Mediterranean climate is like for most of the year, and then ask yourself, would anyone in ancient Greece be dumb enough to wear black armor under that sun? Spoiler? Absolutely not. We already covered what real armor from the Trojan War era actually looked like in a separate video, links in the description, but the short version is this. It's vaguely similar, but only from very far away. That's just how the genre works. For us, antiquity means worn textures, grayscale statues, and shabby cloth. In reality, bright armor was a status symbol. The more vivid the colors, the more expensive the dyes and gold the warrior could afford. Ancient battles looked less like dark fantasy and more like a wall-to-wall cockfight of colors. So it's not surprising that Christopher Nolan, like most of Hollywood, isn't chasing full realism here. And armor isn't the only heat-related inaccuracy. There's also the skin tone. Everyone back then was tanned. Odysseus would not have looked nobly pale. Pale skin only became a beauty standard much later, precisely because it signaled wealth. You weren't working outside all day, so you could afford to stay indoors and protect your skin. Odysseus may have been a commander, but he was the kind who shared every hardship with his men, which means he should have been just as brutally sunburnt as the rest of them. Nothing extreme, obviously, but noticeably tanned. And yes, the Western audience has already started pointing out that representation in the trailer is, let's say, lacking. Aside from one Asian-looking guy briefly visible inside the Trojan horse, that's basically it. And funnily enough, that's actually fairly accurate. The ancient Greeks were familiar with Africans, but no African contingents fought in the Trojan War itself. There is Memnon, the Ethiopian king, who brings troops to aid Troy in the epics. But here's the nuance. Ethiopian, for the Greeks, didn't mean only Africa. It could also refer to peoples from Asia, roughly modern-day Iran. And Memnon, as depicted in the Iliad, was likely one of these Eastern Ethiopians, not a dark-skinned African. But let's get back to Agamemnon in plastic-like armor. He's played by Benny Safdie, and between the black armor and the way the scene is staged, Nolan is very clearly signaling this guy is a villain. And here we hit a wall, because in the Odyssey, Agamemnon isn't a villain. Hot-tempered tyrant, sure. Emotional, authoritarian, a questionable strategist, possibly, but not a straight-up antagonist. His relationship with Odysseus was tense but cooperative, more like uneasy allies than enemies. In fact, Agamemnon personally traveled to Ithaca to recruit Odysseus for the Trojan expedition, so whatever Nolan is cooking here, only he knows. Truth be told, the Odyssey doesn't really have classic villains at all. There's no Voldemort figure. The real antagonists are the gods, interfering not out of evil, but because they can, because they're bored, or because someone bruised their ego. The Odyssey is a story about a man facing 1,000 arbitrary obstacles thrown into his path by higher powers. The only people who truly qualify as villains are Penelope's suitors, and even then, Odysseus deals with them very quickly once he gets home. In that sense, the Odyssey is actually very close to The Martian. In that story, Mark Watney never really faces a villain either. He's fighting circumstance itself. In the Odyssey, that role is taken by the will of the gods. And the fact that Matt Damon stars in both films is a pretty great irony, because Odysseus is remarkably similar to Watney in character. He's resourceful, sharp-minded, endlessly inventive, and extremely good with words. It was Odysseus who helped Agamemnon assemble the Greek forces for Troy by binding all the kings with a clever oath. It was Odysseus who insisted on bringing Achilles into the war. Without him, the Greeks simply wouldn't have won. It was Odysseus who later persuaded Achilles to return to battle after his clash with the hot-headed Agamemnon. And when Achilles died, the question arose of who should inherit his armor. It went to Odysseus, not Ajax, which humiliated Ajax so deeply that it ultimately destroyed him. That alone says a lot about Odysseus' status among the Greeks. Even the shipbuilding moment mirrors The Martian. In that film, Watney constructs a makeshift rover to cross Mars. Here, Odysseus will be building a raft to make his final push back to Ithaca. It's that mix of intelligence, resilience, and practical ingenuity that made Athena favor him. And yes, in this film, she's played by Zendaya. Odysseus was exactly the kind of hero she admired. And let's be honest, women adored Odysseus too. Many of them wanted him, sometimes successfully. That's not just plot convenience. That's very much in line with Greek culture and mythological logic of the era. But let's move on to Tom Holland. In the film, he plays Telemachus, Odysseus' son, too young to remember his father and too weak to stand up to the suitors harassing Penelope. That frustrates Telemachus endlessly, but he doesn't give up. Instead, he goes searching for Odysseus in his own way. Telemachus travels from house to house, visiting other heroes of the Trojan War and asking what they know about his father's fate. One of them is Menelaus, played here by John Bernthal, who confirms that Odysseus is still alive. That revelation sets Telemachus on his own path of growth, and later he fights alongside his father to wipe out the suitors. But before that reunion can happen, Odysseus has to complete his legendary trials. In the poem, he recounts 9 major adventures during a feast at the court of Alcinous after retelling the fall of Troy. The Cyclops we see in the trailer is actually the second of these trials. Before that came the Lotus Eaters, the enchanted lotus that makes anyone who eats it forget everything they've ever cared about. Odysseus avoids the trap himself and barely manages to restrain his crew, who completely lose the will to return home. As for the Cyclops, everyone knows how that ends. Odysseus introduces himself as nobody, blinds the giant with a sharpened stake, and when the Cyclops' kin rush in asking who attacked him, he screams that nobody did it. And thanks to that single lie, Odysseus and his crew escape untouched. The third adventure then takes place on the island of Aeolus, god of the winds, who grants Odysseus safe passage on one condition: he must not fall asleep until Ithaca is reached. Just when Ithaca was already visible on the horizon, Odysseus finally gave in to exhaustion and fell asleep. That single mistake ruined everything. Enraged, Aeolus released the winds again and hurled the ship back across the sea. The fourth trial was even worse. Giants wiped out 11 of Odysseus' 12 ships in a single massacre. In the fifth, fate threw him onto the island of the sorceress Circe, who turned his companions into swine with her magic. The sixth ordeal sent Odysseus somewhere no living man wanted to go, down into the realm of the dead. He descended into Hades to seek counsel from Achilles and Agamemnon, trying to understand why his journey home kept failing and what he was doing wrong in life itself. The seventh challenge brought the Sirens, whose songs lured sailors to their deaths. Odysseus survived that one through preparation rather than strength, wax in his crew's ears, and his own body bound tightly to the mast. The eighth trial was far more brutal. Scylla and Charybdis devoured 6 of his men, though the ship itself survived. The 9th and most devastating stop was the island of Helios. Starving and desperate, Odysseus's remaining companions broke their sacred oath and slaughtered the sun god's holy cattle. The punishment was absolute. Every one of them died. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to life by pure luck, washing ashore on the island of the nymph Calypso. She kept him there for 8 long years, enchanting him, offering immortality, trying to make him stay, but it never truly worked. Eventually, the gods intervened, and Odysseus was finally allowed to return home. That said, there's no guarantee the film will follow this sequence exactly. What we call the Odyssey comes to us through countless retellings, reinterpretations, and contradictions. There were alternative versions even in antiquity. One example is the Phrygians by Aeschylus, a tragedy that hasn't survived to the present day, but was well known in ancient Rome. Frescoes from Pompeii depict entirely different details: Hector and Achilles fighting from chariots rather than on foot, Hector's body ransomed with gold instead of cloth, and many other variations. All of this leads to a simple conclusion. Strictly speaking, there is no single immutable canon, neither for the Trojan War nor even for the Odyssey itself. What we have is the most popular version, retold and reshaped again and again over centuries. So if Christopher Nolan chooses to adjust certain elements, it won't be a betrayal of the myth, it will be part of the tradition. Minor historical inaccuracies aren't a real problem either. What truly matters is whether the film sparks curiosity, draws people toward history, and makes them want to engage with the classics. So what do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That's it for now. A new video drops tomorrow.